here in the museum, second Thursday of the month. One of our projects at the American Legion, in association with the Veterans Museum and BVSA, which is the Broomfield Veterans Support Alliance, as well as the Beth Skinner Realty, is to provide stockings, Christmas stockings, for senior veterans in various homes in the Broomfield area, senior living homes or nursing homes. And so every year we conduct a collection of items. As you can see here, the donated items we're looking for are here, basically stocking stuffers, beef jerky, granola bars, maybe socks, sugar-free candy, and regular candy also, pudding and cups and stuff, and we collect those, and we collect them right here at the museum when we're open, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And if you look back in the back, there should be a box. Oh, Kent, could you hold that box up for me? There's a Christmas box where we collect it down here. There's also a gift-wrapped box up in the main lobby where we collect items. So if you'd like to donate items for the Christmas stockings, we would very much appreciate it. Unfortunately, today is the last day. We made this announcement a couple weeks ago also. But today is the last day collecting. Tomorrow we set up this room to stuff the stockings on Monday. Monday at noon we're going to come in and we stuff all the stockings. We usually have between 100 and 150 stockings that then we distribute throughout the Broomfield area. So if you have time to do that, we would appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Thanks, John. I just wanted to go ahead with our normal kind of listing of admin announcements for all of you. But again, to thank very much the city, the county, for their support to the museum, because we couldn't survive without them. They provide us the building, heating, lighting, any repairs we need to get done. And we're responsible then for the exhibits themselves, the preservation of that, and any of the programs we do. But again, it's just been such a marvelous cooperation. And various other community philanthropy groups who, again, were able to obtain grants to help support the museum. Just a quick reminder, good time to put your cell phones on mute. If you haven't signed in to the museum, when you came into the building, there's a sign-up listing in the hallway down here and up above, and that documents that people actually do visit the museum. And that's quite important for us to be able to demonstrate that to the city and county. Again, museum membership. If you haven't become a museum member but would like to, we gladly will provide you one of our little forms. Again, that's one of the key things which shows we have a strong community support. And again, thank you all for who have been joining us. Any donations, obviously that helps pay for our coffee and conversation and donuts and stuff. And just to highlight a couple other things, we have the new Battle of the Bulge exhibit upstairs, who was actually designed, put together by Flint Whitlock, a noted historian and author and a board member for us. And a marvelous series of paintings down the corridor, if you haven't seen it, by Noah Webb, who was a young soldier in Vietnam and then came back and became quite an artist. The first set of exhibit paintings we had were based on his experience in Vietnam, and now we have just a whole series of other ones of his areas of interest. And if you like one, I'm sure he's willing to part with one. For a small fee, yes. Thank you. Our last talk actually will be next week. We have one more we want to fit in here, and that's Lou Moyer. In fact, Lou's, oh, there he is in the back. Raise your hand again, Lou. Yes, yeah. This young, handsome guy, would you believe they actually allowed him to get in these big airplanes, these B-52s, and fly them around forever. And Lou just has some marvelous stories. I mean, he flew them around when they were loaded with, atomic weapons. And then later in Vietnam, he was the one way up in the air while most of us were on the ground looking at them go by. So that will be our last talk for the year. And to start things off, again, we're so fortunate to have both Nancy and Diana here to represent their two families and the young sailors their fathers were. But to get going, I'd like to give Jerry Galvin a chance to briefly talk about the USS West Virginia. And Jerry's just a master modeler. Both he and Kent Strapko have provided us marvelous models. And there's a 9-foot model of the USS Colorado upstairs that if you haven't seen, you definitely have to go. And it's remote control. It floats, it does literally everything but probably fire the little cannons on it. But without further ado, I would like Jerry to give us a quick orientation on the USS West Virginia.
Thank you. Good morning.
Get over here so we can see you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Show up.
Okay, I didn't break the camera? Okay, very good. All right. Let me come over here. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jerry Galvin. I'm a modeler out of Fort Collins. I'm also a real estate broker, but I come down to support the museum. And whenever the museum needs a plane or a ship, they'll call me. And usually 9 times out of 10, I have it. I said, when do you want ship or plane? And they want to know how big it is. So anyhow, that's myself with the Colorado. It's here. But I want to cover the West Virginia class, the West Virginia, which is a member of the Colorado class battleships. You read in your history books called the Big Five in the Navy lore, and that is representing the 5 big ships built in the 20s around the Washington Naval Treaty, and one didn't get finished. It got scrapped, and now it would have been 6. We're talking about the Tennessee, California, Colorado, Maryland, Washington, and West Virginia. West Virginia was BB-48. The class is BB-45 on. Sometimes they call it the Maryland class because Maryland was finished before Colorado. But Colorado has the hull number, and they get the class honors. So anyway, the model you see here is configured as 1937, which West Virginia and all those three were in the same configuration. Now, I bring in Tennessee and West Virginia, California for a reason, because they're built on the same hull. It's identical. What's the differences? California and Tennessee were mounted with 14-inch triple barrel in 4 turrets. Colorado and her sisters are 16-inch, so there's a difference. And if you look at Bismarck, you hear stories on Bismarck. Bismarck was a 15-inch. So Colorado, the class carried the first 16-inch batteries. If you go back to Saratoga and Lexington, they were battle cruisers with 16-inch, but they were never finished. They were aircraft carriers. And so what you see here is the 3 ships, but the sisters, and they're identical as they were in 1937. After the Pearl Harbor attack, West Virginia and California really took the hits because they were on the outside. They were repatched up and sent back to the Pacific West Coast, Bremerton. Okay. Oh, let's see. Okay. Oh. Okay. So go to the West Virginia, and the specs you have here are identical to the 3 sisters. They were considered very large ships, and as the years went on, they were upgraded, things were added, and changes made. So the 32,600 tons, they became a lot heavier. And when the war broke out with West Virginia and getting rebuilt, she was heavily modified. And then you can see the class here. Washington was scrapped. No, was sunk as a target because the Washington Naval Treaty said he only had so much tonnage. And Washington was still in construction phase, so they stopped construction and they towed her out for target practice and learning about how these ships can take hits, which we do today anyway. They did that to the USS America, a supercarrier, and they sunk her. They want to know how much she can take, and she took a lot. We built them very well in the United States. So you can see the three sisters here with the Washington out of the picture. You can see that they were all scrapped about the same time, and they were decommissioned right in 47 because there were newer battleships, South Dakota class and the Iowa class.
I think it also kind of almost marked the end of the battleship era.
That's right.
After World War II.
Right. And the last real battleship was finished was the Vanguard, the British, was the last battleship finished. So, but if you look at where the ships were in position, you can see where they took the hits. And so Maryland and Tennessee got off light because they were inside the closest to, and the West Virginia and Oklahoma were on the outside. We all know what happened to Oklahoma. She turned turtle, capsizing. West Virginia was hit with a number of torpedoes, but counterflooding saved the ship from flipping over like its sister, half-sister ahead of her. So you want to be mindful, and it took a while to get the ship back into the water to be ready to go back for rebuilding. And she came out with a radical look in her rebuilding, and in fact, they look like the South Dakota class, which is compact. They call it the compact superstructure.
Flip the next slide.
Okay. Okay, you can see the difference of the two of the ship. It's the same. West Virginia had a huge torpedo bulge added, which allowed it to carry the 538 twin 5-inch weaponry you can see along the side abreast of the superstructure. Instead of two smokestacks and case mass, she has one compact superstructure with one big smokestack. Everything was truncated into one. She came out looking like a real modern battleship, so the South Dakota, if you compare, if you want to research further. But if you look at the first picture in 35, and the battleship upstairs is identical to what she looked like in 35.
But what was the purpose of these tall, funny-looking things there?
The masts?
Yeah.
Well, those were for observation. And people will come up and say, hey, Jerry, your clock is off on the Colorado. I don't have a clock. What it is, they're range finders. And the observers up there will pinpoint and give out the readings. And, of course, they had observation airplanes on the fantail of the back of the ship called stern. They were also used for observation as well, to radio back and say, you hit it. No, you missed. You got to do it again. So that's how we had those tower masts. And all of them, and there were cage masks versus the tripod masts you see on the Arizona, Oklahoma, Nevada. So and they were built differently, and cage masks held up really well until a bad storm. Sometimes they was fold over. You just don't want to be on the tower when they fold over. Okay, but if you look at West Virginia, she is in 44. It's a very good-looking ship, very good-looking. If you look at it from the air, she's very wide, because they added their torpedo bulges in order to accommodate the twin 5-inch 38 caliber weapons. Otherwise, they were very good shore bombardment ships. They were 21 knots. They could not keep up with the Missouris, the fast carriers. So the newer battleships ran with the carriers because they can keep up, but the older battleships were used for bombardment and escorts and stuff because they can keep up and manage well. And not too many people wanted to fuss with them unless you were in a submarine, and then that was another story. They would come in and hit you. But these ships took a lot of punishment. I mean, look at how fast we got them out of the water, repaired, and back into service. Tennessee and Maryland were never really modified until later in the war, but they were already running within a month or two after Pearl Harbor. The Japanese figured that they'd knocked us out of the war. Well, they didn't. By the way, they forgot about the aircraft carriers. So anyway, that's pretty much the gist of it on it. I want to give it to the families and thank the families for being here. It's a real esteemed honor to share the history on it. And next to Mike are some books that I brought up that show the various ships. I don't have one on Colorado, but just enough on the battleships, but it gives you a good chronological history. Any questions before I hand it over to the families?
Well, one thing I'll just highlight, again, the purpose of these tall masts is this was before the time of radar.
That's
So
right.
the only way you could actually see long distances to adjust your fire is you had to be high. Radar, now, these ships had radar-controlled guns and everything. So you no longer needed those tall. And that, again, helped provide that sleeker look. And during the Battle of Surigao Strait, Leyte Gulf, and others, we could engage the enemy, the Japanese, before they could even see us. It gave us that heads up, a great advantage for night fight. Because again, the radar, showed exactly where they were and helped us get them the first accurate shots of those things.
Exactly correct. And thing is, the Japanese were not very advanced on the radar until the Germans started helping them out and using U-boats to transport radar parts to Japan. So we had the in on them, but what Reef did not have the in on them. Japan was really good with optics, exceptionally and they were excellent night fighters. And we learned that the hard way. But with the radar, it made a difference. Now, on the upper picture, in the Colorado class ships, your antennas were long and they were strung across the whole ship because that was the only way to get communication. Take a look at Titanic. Titanic did the same thing because they came out with the same technology. And one's an ocean liner and these are battleships, but they had the same purpose on the radios. So now with radar, you don't have that, but they have improved the radio too, where they can communicate without the long, tall masts. Okay, anything else, Mike?
No, that's it.
Okay, well, thank you, folks.
Diana, please come up and introduce your family, and I will call up your slides while you're come up here.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming. 4 of Pete's grandchildren are here. This is my oldest son, Vince, and he will be speaking. My nephew, Mike, and his wife, Christy. My niece, Heather, her husband, Ron. My niece, Alexa, and her fiance, Jared. Our friends, Elaine and John Lee. And my dear friend, Denise. Thank you for coming. And, well, I'm Pete's oldest daughter, and 2 of my sisters were not able to come today, and we lost my brother about 4 years ago. But I know that they're all here in spirit. Okay, do you want me to introduce Vince?
Do you want to, or is Vince going to do this?
You can run the slides.
All right, I'll turn it over to Vince.
Okay, and I'll take that, since you're, or you,
Want me to stand here?
No, you can go sit down. Thanks, Mom. And thanks to everybody for taking time to remember the 83rd anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. So thanks for being here today and those online. I'm here today to talk a little bit about the West Virginia and my grandfather, Albert Pete Peterson, one of the finest men I've ever known. You hear the greatest generation. He truly was part of the greatest generation. I'm going to call him Grandpa Pete throughout this. He was born on December 13th, 1921 in Denver. He enlisted in the Navy in January 17th, 1941 at the age of 19. This panoramic photo I brought with me today is from our family's private collection. It's been rolled up since 1941. I recently got a hold of it from my aunt and decided to frame it up. But this picture is from that exact time in history. This picture is from the spring of 1941 at the U.S. Naval Training Station in San Diego, California. It was printed by the photo shop at the ship service department. My grandfather had it rolled up and mailed it back to his grandparents, or his parents. So after the talk, if you'd like to come check it out, I have a little flag where my grandfather is in the picture, but again, this is from the Naval Training Station in the spring of 1941. I thought it was a really cool, naval training boot camp type of picture to bring. But after my grandfather finished his training at the Naval Training Station in San Diego, he was assigned to the West Virginia, and then the West Virginia arrived, and he headed for Hawaii. My grandfather was assigned to the 6th Division as a black powder man on the 16-inch guns, number 3 turret. His friend Louis Peterson, who you'll see in a few slides here, he grew up with my grandfather, and so they were luckily both assigned to the West Virginia. So it was good to have a good buddy to be on the ship with him, have one of his friends there with him. It made it a little bit easier. But 83 years ago on this morning, my grandfather was just getting ready to go on Liberty. I always remember he's telling me he was getting ready to go on shore leave, just have a good day on shore. And then all of a sudden, across the radio, came the warning: Pearl Harbor's under attack. This is no drill. Repeat, this is no drill. And so he got up topside and then just saw the planes, just coming down in waves. And the West Virginia was hit by 7 torpedoes on the port side. They originally thought 5, but then once they recovered it, there was actually 7 torpedoes. And then 2 armor-piercing bombs also hit the West Virginia. They didn't explode, but they both, wherever they hit, they collapsed the deck and collapsed to a lower deck. And so even though the bombs didn't explode, the gasoline and then the armor-piercing nature of the shell caused damage to the ship itself. So even though the bombs didn't explode, they were armor-piercing and still had a lot of the gas that caused a lot of damage to the ship. But on that morning, my grandpa Pete, here's what he said about that time. Remember, he was a black powder man. He said, "We doused the ammunition with water when we saw the ship was on fire. Everything was ablaze. We couldn't see anything. We did what we could. We tried to save as many as we could. The harbor was a holocaust. Ships were broken apart like toys. Oil spread across the glass smooth water and then caught fire. Hundreds of sailors were tossed overboard by the bomb blasts." So I can only just try and imagine what that type of situation was like. But he stayed on the ship as long as he could until he was literally ordered to abandon ship. And he dumped off the side of the ship with 9 other guys. But he was the first one to reach Fort Island, the first of the 10 that jumped off. And you'll see this in your handout. And he always loved saying this. I always remember this. He was like, "I never really liked swimming, but even I could have beaten Esther Williams on that day." So he could barely swim, but he made it to Fort Island as quick as anybody. And a little sort of morbidly, after the attack, my grandfather helped pull casualties out of the water and just helped clean up as much as he could after the attack.
I'm going to show the next slide. There you go.
Yeah, this is a rare color picture. I haven't seen too many of this colorized. I've usually seen it in black and white, but this is a color photo just of the West Virginia, one view of it. And like my grandfather said, you couldn't hardly see anything because of smoke, and the oil in the water was on fire. It was just horrific, Holocaust type scene. But the West Virginia had to guard itself against other collateral damage as well, because like the Arizona, that had spilled hundreds of gallons of oil into the sea, which was catching fire. The Oklahoma had capsized. But the West Virginia was saved from a similar fate by many, many heroes that day, including Lieutenant Ricketts, Captain Bennion, and then Lieutenant Commander J.S. Harper, whose counter-flooding efforts helped save the West Virginia even later on, because as it was going to capsize, he counter-flooded it at the same time, so that way it let the West Virginia rest on an even keel, so it sank basically like straight down, and that allowed it to be recovered later on. So the actions of a lot of people to help save the ship, not just at that time, but they thought about the future too. They're like, we've got to counter-flood the ship, which sort of seems counterintuitive, but so it can rest on an even keel. So that's what they did. And then one other person I'd like to mention about the West Virginia, a little sidebar before I talk a little more about my grandfather, was Dory Miller, the ship's cook on the West Virginia. He survived, and he was the first black person to receive the Navy Cross for his actions of valor during the attack of Pearl Harbor. So if you don't know the story of Doris Miller, I encourage you to look it up. He stayed behind on the ship, like my grandfather, just to do whatever he could. He helped bring other sailors from the lower decks up. Even though the decks were flooding, he went down in flooding decks, brought people up. Captain Bennion had a shrapnel wound in his belly. Doris Miller tried to move him to a place of relative safety just so he could continue giving orders until his last final breath. And then Doris Miller, he started loading the Browning 50 caliber anti-aircraft machine gun magazines. He started loading ammunition so other people could start firing. And then he noticed one of the 50 caliber anti-aircraft machine guns was, nobody was there to man it. So even though he had no formal training, he just jumped in and started laying down effective fire with a 50 caliber machine gun that he had no training on. And I believe he's credited with 1 confirmed kill. But anyway, Doris Miller has a great story. He was just the cook, but he became one of the heroes that day in just an instant. And just farther, farther on from Doris Miller's story, on his display of courage and valor helped lessen discrimination in the Navy and other branches of service too, because they saw this black person who received the Navy Cross and saw all the actions that he did that day help lessen discrimination throughout the service. And if you didn't know, a future Ford aircraft carrier, I think it's going to start build in 2026, is going to be named the USS Doris Miller. So I just wanted to do a little sidebar about Doris Miller because his actions that fateful day were just as important as anybody's. So the West Virginia, again, it survived the fires, but it was eventually abandoned and it sank to the bottom of Pearl Harbor on an even keel. Its damaged hull was patched up and the West Virginia was raised and dry docked in 1942. The damage to the ship was so great, it had to be transported to the Navy Yard in Washington State for a full-scale repair, as Jerry showed earlier. My grandpa Pete, before that, I wanted to mention this. This is a telegram that my grandfather sent after the attack to his parents, just to let them know that all 3 of us are fine, just to let them know, just to reassure them that they survived the attack at Pearl Harbor. And there's his buddies, there's that Louis guy I mentioned earlier, Louis Pearson, I believe, that went to boot camp with. So it was cool to have a couple friends with him when he was there. So after the attack, my grandfather was then assigned to the Anti-Aircraft Training Center on Oahu, and he was discharged from the Navy in 1945. So after 4 years of military service, my grandpa Pete came home to Denver, Colorado. He married my grandmother Sarah Baumeier, and then he started a family. He had 3 beautiful daughters, Diana, Karen, and Freda, and a son, Pete, who's no longer here. But my grandpa Pete, he had a long career after the Navy. He was a Denver sheriff. He was a salesperson. He worked for his brother at Midwestern Steel and Iron. He worked for his dad at National Byproducts. And then what I remember him, he was working at the post office where he retired in 1983. But he had a lot of hobbies. He liked playing volleyball. He liked to go golfing, bowling. He was a great bowler, dancing. He loved old cars. He had a tin shed out in the back of his house. I remember he always had a nice garage out there with a 1928 Model A Ford Coupe. He and his wife belonged to the Model A Ford Club of Colorado for many years. He was a member of the Elks Lodge, 2227 of Westminster for 25 years. And then in 1964, my grandpa Pete was one of the founders of the Pearl Harbor Survivors Association, Colorado Mile High Chapter Number 1. Each state formed their own Pearl Harbor Survivors chapter. And he really enjoyed doing the Pearl Harbor Survivors activities because he enjoyed being together with other men who could understand what it was like to experience that day on Pearl Harbor. The chapter met every month. They had a business meeting and then a potluck dinner. And then some of the wives also started a Pearl Harbor Survivors Women's Auxiliary group. They often did Memorial Day parades in Grand Lake, Colorado, Veterans Day parade. I got to ride in the rumble seat of that Model A a couple times, and it was always a real blast. My grandfather always liked taking us out and going in the parades. He liked driving around that car. My mom, who's here today, she went to the 25th anniversary of Pearl Harbor in 1966 with my grandpa and Sally, who went there. And then so all the survivors and sons and daughters just promised to help the legacy of this fateful day live on, because many were afraid their stories would be forgotten. So the survivors and sons and daughters all have a special bond together over time. And they continue today to support Pearl Harbor survivors. There's only, I think, 15 or 16 left. But the atmosphere of friendship and camaraderie continues. Over the years, we've developed some strong friendships. My grandpa Pete passed away in May of 1999. He was survived by his wife, Sally, their 4 children, 11 grandchildren, and just a lot of, over a dozen great-grandchildren. So he had a very full life, and thankfully he survived that day, because I always think back to that day. If there was a stray bullet, a stray torpedo, a stray bomb, armor-piercing bomb, I wouldn't be standing here, my mom wouldn't be here, a lot of people wouldn't be here. So there's a lot of things went right that day, thanks to God and thanks to luck and just thanks to his courage. But I also brought, in addition to this picture, I brought a book, a West Virginia book. If you'd like to come check it out after the talk, you can. But before I go, I'd like to end with a quote out of that book. And it comes from the senior surviving officer, R.H. Hillencotter. And he said, "Throughout the entire action and through all the arduous labors which followed, there was never the slightest sign of faltering or cowardice. The actions of the officers and men were wholly commendable. Their spirit was marvelous. There was no panic. There was no shirking, no flinching. Words fail in attempting to describe the truly magnificent display of courage, discipline, and devotion to duty to all the officers and men. The entire ship's company is deserving of the highest commendations, both for their work on the 7th and on the days following. All the ship's company officers and men ask is another chance at the enemy. Their devotion to duty and their performance of duty have given new meanings to those phrases. So may they rest in peace, and may God protect our troops."
One more little photo. And my niece Alexis here. Can you explain this photo with your twin sister? This is my dad's uniform.
I actually still have the pants, and then we found the top.
Were you just dressing up?
Yeah, yeah. That's how, like, I mean, I think we were barely teenagers. That's how little my grandpa was. And it's not lengthwise. He was tall, though. Widthwise.
Yeah. Any other questions?
We'll be around after the talk.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Well, now let's have our next story. Let me just set things up here for you. Okay. We turned on
Yep,
there.
it's on.
Okay.
Okay.
All yours now. I'll put this up here.
Anyway, my name is David Watkins. I'm okay, let's stand this right here for
Go ahead, and I'll get this set. Okay, go ahead.
okay. Well, welcome everybody for coming out on what a wonderful commemoration of one of the worst days in American history. 83rd anniversary of that. And Tom Brokaw was right. The greatest generation. They served, they answered the call, all the men and women, and we owe the men and women of Pearl Harbor such a debt of honor. The Japanese really made a mistake when they awoke the sleeping giant. There's a lot of military men in this audience today, and I just wanted to give you a shout out and a thank you for your service. Some of you are Vietnam veterans, other skirmishes, things like that. Thank you so much for your dedication and commitment to the United States military and its people. But anyway, my name's David Watkins. I'm Don's son-in-law. And I would spent so many years talking to him because he was fiercely proud of his service on the West Virginia. He was one of the chief engineers. I'd have to say the time that I spent, I knew how fiercely proud he was of this service simply because we spent so many hours just talking about those things. He became my second best friend next to my beautiful wife here, who is Don's daughter. But anyway, he was born in Ackley, Iowa in September 1922, and he went on and graduated from Ackley High School and then went to Iowa State University, where he enrolled as an electrical engineer in 1940. And after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, he was a sophomore at that time, and he basically, not too long after that, he went to Des Moines and enlisted in the Naval Reserves. And the Navy was in great need of engineers at that time, simply because of what they were going to be doing. They had so many ships that needed engineers, and Don fit the role perfectly. And so the Navy sent him on to the Naval Academy at Annapolis, where he got his degree there, or he graduated his engineering studies there, and then graduated as an ensign. He then returned back to Ackley, where he was, pardon? Oh, okay. Yeah, here's his graduating class from Annapolis in April of 1944. He's up in the upper corner up there. But not only serving on the West Virginia, he was fiercely proud of going to the Naval Academy too. It's quite an honor to be able to do something like that. My own son-in-law is a graduate of the Air Force Academy, so there's a lot of military history in our family. But anyway, he was assigned to the West Virginia immediately, and which obviously was raised after it was sunk at Pearl, and it was towed to Bremerton, where it was retrofitted and put back to sea in 1943, where he went on board. And his primary duties were as engineer. It was pretty interesting because they had 4 different engineering divisions on the West Virginia. One was auxiliary, which encompasses everything that boilers, electrical, and the main engines did not. So, but anyway, he served, as far as I know, he's the only one that served in all 4 of these divisions during his tenure on the ship. Anyway, he finished his career as a Lieutenant JG in the M Division, which was the main engines where he serviced. And anyway, the Weavy traversed to the West Coast for a short training period and left Puget Sound in July of '44 for the South Pacific. They were all excited about that. One of the things that kind of interesting, anybody here heard about what's involved with crossing the equator in the Navy? He told me a little bit about that. He said you had King Neptune was assigned to oversee the proceedings, and they lined up similar to college hazing in fraternities, and they had to go through a hamper full of fish guts and all kinds of stuff like that. And afterwards, they would shave their heads. They put through all sort of rituals and dedicated themselves to saving marine life. So that was just a part of the proceedings. It was one day of celebration and fun. And he talked about that a great deal. I said, "Did you throw up?" He says, "Everybody threw up." But anyway, he was involved. Excuse me, I haven't talked in a while, so this.
Let me advance the slides for you.
Okay. I'm so focused on what I'm saying here. I'll let you do that. But anyway, yeah, so he was assigned to the West Virginia when he left, when he graduated from the Naval Academy, and went to for training at Long Beach. And what is that?
Well, you can see it on your screen.
Oh, okay. You can see I'm new to this. Anyway, they were tied up at Pearl Harbor, and nearly in the same spot that she was sunk before. And I can only think how much dedication and thanks that we owe the men and women that were there at Pearl that day. It was a truly extraordinary thing. And the Weavy spent 18 months at Bremerton being retrofitted and came back in 1943. We saw the 2 pictures of the Weavy before and after. She was pretty much of a beast before, but she became an absolute monster. Nobody wanted to mess with what they call a capital ship. when she received her commissioning, very big time. But
She didn't stay long in Pearl.
no, she wasn't there. They raised her pretty quick, and she went to Bremerton where she was retrofitted and given 16-inch guns instead of the 3-barrel 14-inch turrets. Now she had twin-barrel 16-inch turrets. I asked him one time, when we were talking, I said, you're going into, you're not really, you don't know what you're going to be doing, but you know you're going into battle, the Sargasso Straits. I said, you're 22 years old. What was that like? Were you afraid, fearsome? What were your thoughts? He says, we were bulletproof. We were so focused on what we wanted to do that we never thought about any of that. We were absolutely bulletproof. And he says, when you turn those 8 16-inch guns to port, he says that he yelled fire in the hold, you grab something and that ship listed 10 feet this way and straightened back up. He says it's absolutely one of the most thrilling things that a person can go through. He loved it absolutely, and he was, I know he did, because even though all the fishing and the hunting and the camping that he did here in Colorado after he moved back here, we spent so much time talking about that. We have boxes of paperwork of his days on the West Virginia. And it's pretty remarkable.
To just highlight here, you arrived back in Pearl in early September.
Yeah.
By mid-October, they were off, and they knew where they were heading,
Yeah.
the Philippines.
And so that's when they entered the Leyte Gulf on October the 19th. Yes, they had some minor skirmishes at that time, but the real battle didn't start until October the 24th, when the heavy attack started. And you can see there's a image here, kind of the opening fire, the opening salvos. The Japanese fleet was 17 miles downrange, and West Virginia was firing 2,100-pound shells. And she supposedly, and it's not official, but they don't know which one, but she was credited with sinking one. As far as I know, from what I've heard through reading my history, is that the Battle of the Sargasso Straits was the largest naval engagement in history. I mean, the United States had, where's the next, the one showing the,
Well, just to highlight, when we talk about the Battle of Leyte Gulf, you actually are talking about 4 major actions that occurred over a 3-day period, which is kind of what was highlighted here. The first was the Battle of Seabold Sea, which was up north in this area. You had the Battle of Sargasso Strait, which was the key one, which Don was involved in. And then you had the Battle of Cape Engano,
Cape Engano and the Battle of Samar.
There's some marvelous videos which explain that whole sequence of actions here. But this is kind of what Don was involved in. If you want to comment,
Well,
there's the schematic.
As far as I know, this was the largest naval battle in history. There was more tonnage sunk during this encounter over the two-day period than any other naval battle in history. It was also the last battle between battleships, head-to-head, because after that they went to flat tops, which had much more firepower and much longer range. And so it's a legendary moment in history of what took place during this engagement, especially at the Battle of the Sargasso Straits. So after, so they call it the last battle of the last great battle between battleships. So anyway, after Sargasso,
Well, you want to just comment where the West Virginia was?
Oh, yeah.
This is where you
he's
talk
right
about
here.
crossing the
In
T.
fact, these are all the battleships. On this image right here, you can see I ghosted in a few things there, but 5 of these battleships were at Pearl, including the California and the Tennessee, which was shielded by the West Virginia, And the California was sunk and raised back up. And on that day, on the opening salvo, the West Virginia, during a 7-minute time period, fired 92 rounds downrange, 17 miles downrange. That must have been fearful for the Japanese to be faced with that kind of bombardment. And that was just from the West Virginia. There was another 100 or so, 100 to 200 rounds that were fired collectively among the other 5 battleships. So it was an amazing assault. When I counted the number, so you have destroyers, cruisers, things like that to offer support and protection from them. Further downrange, you see a list of PT boats that set the stage and for what was to come with the major bombardment.
This is the classic crossing the T.
Yep.
Which anyone who studies naval strategy, that is what you're always trying to position yourself, where your forces kind of are crossing perpendicular to the enemy, because this way you can bring all your guns to bear on the ships coming up at you, and the enemy can only bring the guns of their first couple of ships at you.
Well, crossing the T is kind of a double-edged sword because you turn your whole ship into facing the enemy, but you have full firepower. You turn those in, you reduce half your firepower, you're a harder target. But when you have that kind of armament, I'd rather open fire like this, crossing the T. There's a funny story with this. When I did this illustration, and Don was so thrilled with it, and the first thing he said, "You did it wrong." And I said, "What?" He says, "We were going this way." This is done right. I had it painted backwards. I painted the original backwards with the firepower going this direction. He said that wasn't the way we were headed. So I'm an expert in Photoshop. I just hit a couple of buttons. He says, "What can we do?" I said, "Watch this." Click. He said, "Okay." So anyway, that's how that came about. But it just changed my lighting a little bit. This was 3 in the morning, so if I did that, it would probably look like the back of this computer because you wouldn't see anything but darkness. But anyway, he was so proud of that because he said that's just the way it was. But anyway, after, let's see.
That was a comment that Don had in the log.
Yep, they fired 92 rounds in 7 minutes. 2 big targets disappeared from their screen. They credited the Navy with sinking 1 battleship, and the 1 U.S. plane was shot down. I think that's a quite extraordinary exchange.
And this just reflects that afterwards, the fleet didn't disappear. They were still hanging around. And then was the beginning of the massive kamikaze attacks we first started, seeing off the Philippine Islands. And so we just extracted, a comment to at least give an idea a little bit what it was like. Oh, there's your
There it is. Now imagine that is flipped, and I just spent 30 hours painting that, and he says, "You got it wrong." He said, "In what way?" He says, "It's backwards."
But you can't imagine what it was like being down in the engine room and all inside. Because you're going into battle, but 1, it's at night. 2, you're totally locked up. All the hatches are logged down because in case you got hit, you wanted to be protected from fire and other things. And then the 16-inch guns go off. It just must have just shocked the whole ship. Whenever it fired.
It's like I said, fire in the hold, and everybody in that ship, I see a lot of nods of agreement because they know what it's like when that kind of armament goes off all at once.
Then if you're down in the engine room area, Yeah, that must have been 120 degrees, out in the Pacific, no air conditioning. It's just amazing what they did.
One other thing, at the battle at the Saragasso Straits, the Japanese had two monster battleships, the Yamashiro and the Musashi. And the Yamashiro was sunk. And they don't know which of our armament did it. But still, these were the two largest battleships in the world. They were bigger than the Bismarck. And so that was quite a testament. And neither one ever sank an American ship. I mean, the Yamashiro was sunk before it ever did anything. And so that's a further testament of the dedication of what the American Navy had in store for them. It's a picture of Don when he was, I'd say, how old? About 85? Maybe 90? He looks pretty good in his uniform there. He says we should all be so fortunate to spend our lives and be able to do that kind of thing. And I think this is in a dedication at the Arizona Memorial. And each year, the West Virginia had a reunion among the members. And as the years go along and they pass away, it gets smaller and smaller. But I think one year they had it there, and they all met and dedicated in dedication of the Arizona Memorial. I'm not sure about the year. But anyway, one of my favorite stories about, well, I have a couple of stories to tell about their reunions. I went to two of them. I went with Don to San Antonio, and I was sitting at a table, and there were two men that were sitting across from me, and they were just bickering at one another, and not saying anything kind, just literally yelling at one another. And I said, "Excuse me, are you two friends?" And I couldn't have insulted them more if I had slapped them, because they were best friends. And they both said, "I would die for this man." That was the mentality of the military. I mean, you had their back, they had yours. But I found that humorous, because I could envision these two 90-year-old men rolling back the clock 60 years, and the same conversations going on, the same bickering. And I said, that's what gets them through the perilous times, is close friendships like that. Anyway, that's Don. I think that was in San Antonio. And another one, they had one in Colorado Springs. And so we got to go down to that one. And that was after I'd painted this. And so they had this on display, and they said, David Watkins, Don Seibold's son-in-law, painted this. And this room was filled with the members who served on the West Virginia, and they gave me a round of applause, which embarrassed me, because I was sitting in a room full of my heroes, and I stood, and they said, "Say something," and I said, "What can I say?" I said, "You men are my heroes, and I met a man who was on there, and he was blown off the West Virginia, and he landed about 100 feet from the ship, and it's 80 feet down, so he had quite a ride to get to." But I was embarrassed, because I painted a picture these men served. They got the call, and they answered it, and them and many men and women did. And so I was kind of embarrassed about that, but I was proud to be able to put that forth. Anyway, after after Saragasso, let's see what's next on the slideshow here.
Kind of the last one. I don't have
Okay.
anything which shows.
Well, I'll wrap it up here. I'll kind of talk a little bit about his life here. Pardon? Oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, after Saragasso, West Virginia sailed on to Iwo Jima, where they provided ship-to-shore support for the troops there. And that battle lasted about a month. And Don told me that he didn't get to see them raise the flag, which is so legendary in our history, but he did see the flag. And he says, I mean, from the ship's telescopes, he says he was really pleased about that. And my father was a Marine, and he was stationed in Pearl, and he got orders to go to Iwo Jima, and he would have been in the first wave, but the military, for whatever reason, 24 hours before they were to ship out, he got orders to stand down, and he didn't go. So, and if you know anything about your history of Iwo Jima, I think there was almost a 70% death rate of the first wave. So, anyway.
He went on
Had he-
to Okinawa as well, right?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
final surrender.
Well, that was pretty interesting because after that, his next trip, the ship went to Okinawa, where at that point in time, that was in April of '45, the ship was hit by a kamikaze. And Don actually had a pair of dice made out of some metal from that Japanese ship, that Japanese plane that hit the ship. I know they're at home somewhere and we just can't find them, but it's a part of our repertoire. And something else I wanted to bring to light, this is a piece of decking from the West Virginia with the paint on there and everything. And this is going to the museum here. So,
Thank you
and,
so much.
but I don't know, I can't confirm this story, but I have heard after the West Virginia was decommissioned in '47, she harbored peacefully in Bremerton till 1959, which she was sold for scrap, and I think January the 3rd of '61, the scrapping began for the West Virginia. But all the men that served on that were pleased because they didn't want anybody else that didn't walk these decks with the West Virginia in battle. That's the military mindset, but they were so proud of what they did. They didn't want people that didn't go with the West Virginia into battle to walk her decks. So I thought that was a pretty interesting thing. I can't confirm that, but that's what I've heard. But anyway, who knows whose feet? Maybe Don's feet and Pete's feet have been on this. Wouldn't that be interesting? But after Okinawa, after the kamikaze and that, she went on to Tokyo Bay, where along with the Missouri, that's where the Japanese signed the surrender papers in 1945. And so the crew, the West Virginia and its crew were witness to the signing. So I think that when I say the Japanese made a mistake when they bombed Pearl, they awakened the giant. The West Virginia was just a tough battleship, and she became a beast after that. And I think she was, even though the California was sunk, I think because of her participation in what happened at Pearl, taking so much bombardment, saving the Tennessee, she was given the honor of leading the fleet crossing the T. And so that's further testament to her greatness. So anyway, after the war, Don came back, and he had gotten married. He took his honeymoon, and they were married in 1946. And his wife, Nancy's mother, Dee, she was an RN and an Army Corps nurse cadet. So she worked at the naval base where Don was just before he finished up his tenure with the military. So they both contributed. There is a veterans memorial in the town of Ackley where they were both from, in which their names are inscribed in honor of all of the people in the area that served. And also on that plaque is her grandfather, Don's father, is on there, and two of her uncles. So their family is well representative in that memorial. But Don returned to Iowa State. He played football there. He played 1940 through 1946, except for the years that he was in the Navy. And so he had 5 years where he played football with them. They gave him an extra year in '46 when he came back because 1941 was the year that Pearl Harbor took, and that's when he joined the Navy. So they didn't credit him with a year of eligibility. They gave him another year. Instead of 4 years, he got an extra year. But he was fiercely proud of that. The last game that he played in was against Nebraska. Nebraska happened to win that game 7-6, but still, they called it the Big Six at that time. It went on to be the Big 8, now it's the Big 12, and a lot of that's changed. But he was, played in big-time college football, and he was quite the athlete. The coach of the basketball team at Iowa State liked his athleticism and asked him to come out and try out for the team, which he did. And by halftime of the first game that he played in, he had 4 fouls. The coach says, "I don't think we can take you on the team. We like your athleticism, but this is not a football field," because somebody give him an elbow, he'd flatten him. So he says, "You're better off serving Iowa State on the football field." And so he had quite a career there. And so he finished up, and he actually got his final engineering degree. So the Navy took him without his collegiate degree. He did get an engineering certificate from West Point, but he finished up with his final degree. Pardon? Annapolis.
That other school.
That other, yeah.
I apologize to all the men from both West Point and Annapolis for getting them mixed up. My tenure was during the Vietnam War, and I was classified 1Y because I had a problem with kidneys. So being 1Y, they would only call me in time of a national emergency. Otherwise, I would be in the I would have a military background too. But anyway, Don went to work with Western Electric in Chicago, where he worked for a number of years, and then he eventually formed a partnership with a high school friend, and they opened a small construction company where they built houses and construction buildings, things like that. And the economy wasn't too good then, and so he went, after he worked with Western Electric, he opened his own business with this man. His name was Chet Schultz. And after that business went down simply because of the economy, he went back to Western Electric, where he worked with them for 30 years. They moved him out here with his family, and he worked a full 30 to 40 years with the Western Electric and retired with them. One of the things that they did, he and a coworker worked on something called, it's an electronic telephone switchboard device called the 770 PBX. And it really was revolutionary. It was new. And basically, he got credit for saving Western Electric for many, many years. They were able to turn a profit that year, and he and his companion engineer were able to put this machine in order. They sold a lot of them, saved Western Electric for a long time. So anyway, he was quite active in the Broomfield Senior Center. He was a key person in getting the design and the buildings done on the Senior Center. And if it was a hammer or a saw or anything, he used it. He never stopped working in his garage. He never stopped working and building things. And his other passion was fishing. He traveled all over Canada with his family and friends fishing. So he was quite the outdoorsman. He had wound up having 3 children. He had 2 sons, and Nancy here, his daughter.
Well, how did you two meet?
Through a friend.
Well, we met through a mutual friend. I was a professional, semi-professional dart player for about 20 years, of which we had a pretty substantial league here. And a friend of hers was working at one of the establishments we played out of. And that's how I met her, through this friend. And we got married. We just celebrated our 30th this year, so thank you so much. But anyway, getting back to Don, he had an amazing work ethic. He never stopped doing it. He had a passion for football, family, and fishing. The great 3 Fs. But from a very young age, he always wanted to be an engineer, and he selected engineering, and that's what he did. He was a good one, like he was a good sailor. And he passed away in 2019, at the wonderful, glorious old age of 97. So but nothing more than it was a long, good, honorable life. And I still miss him to this day. I will miss him forever. But he was one of my heroes.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions? I stumbled over enough, but maybe I can answer a question.
So I'd like to present to both of you, Nancy and Diane, one of our challenge points. And again, I know you did all the way talking and everything, but just to recognize it. Again, thank your fathers for their service. So please come around and also visit upstairs where we have the model. And on the wall, we didn't get a chance to really talk too much. An exhibit case